Hi, friends. Good afternoon. I hope everybody is happy this afternoon. My name is Alena Shautsova. Today, we're going to be discussing during our live meeting a very important topic of immigration fraud. Why? Well, because it's a popular topic to discuss. You probably saw various headlines in the news saying that the government of the United States is announcing war on fraud, and I think it's worth discussing, right? We're going to talk about what immigration fraud is, the most common types of cases or happenings as to how it occurs usually, and if there is a legal way out of it, right? If the United States immigration laws allow you to resolve this issue if you have this issue. So please join me. Welcome, welcome. Let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to type up your questions. In the end, I'm going to be answering your guys' questions live. Again, we're discussing immigration fraud tonight. It's a hot topic. Most of you, I am absolutely sure, would like to stay away from it completely. But if it happened, it happened, and we're going to discuss if you can do anything about it. And I'm going to share with you some examples as to what can be done legally, right? I'm not inventing that. That's what the law allows you to do. So please like and share the stream. Say hello. And don't forget to ask your questions. Send me some hearts if you're watching me on TikTok. Send me likes and shares on other platforms. And let's start. All right, so there is a definition of immigration fraud provided to us by USCIS itself. And according to the USCIS practice manual, the fraud may occur as fraud or as willful misrepresentation. Though there is a slight distinction between the two happenings, in reality, it's just academic. It means that in practice, most likely, you are not going to feel the difference in treatment between these two things when you commit fraud or you commit willful misrepresentation. Both make you inadmissible. But they make you inadmissible only if the fraud or that willful misrepresentation would be regarded as material to your case. It means that the officer, the adjudicator, will rely on that misrepresentation or fraud when they're making the decision about your case. Well, let's say something like this is happening during your immigrant visa interview, right? You are being asked if you had breakfast today, right? And you say yes. And what did you have for breakfast? You say coffee, but in reality, you drank tea. Well, it doesn't really matter what happened. So even though you committed misrepresentation and perhaps you even lied about what you had for breakfast, it wouldn't affect the outcome. Your answer would not affect the outcome of that interview, right? Because it doesn't really matter. That's not what's important for your qualifications for the visa. But let's say there is a different question posed by the officer. They're asking you if you're married and you're not in fact married, but you say, yes, I am. Well, that's a material representation that the officer would rely on when they decide whether or not you should be given that visa to come to the United States. Because if you are married, chances are you're going to go back to your home country after your visa expires, your stay expires, to visit your spouse. But if you are not married, then the ties with your country are of lesser importance to you, so you may stay. So that's what it is. That's the material aspect of this fraud or willful misrepresentation. Even though the government of the United States goes into greater detail explaining when fraud occurs, when willful misrepresentation occurs, there are very detailed explanations about that on the website. If you go to the USCIS practice manual, and I'm displaying those explanations on the screen if you're watching me on YouTube. In practice, both, if they're material, will cause some sort of trouble for you. Okay. So, of course, when you are filling out that paperwork, When someone else is filling out that paperwork, you always must check it to make sure you are as accurate as you can be, precise almost in all of your answers. Because sometimes things may pop up that will surprise you. So let's talk about when, in my practice, in 17 years, I've seen this immigration fraud happening the most. I can say a lot. Immigration fraud is not as widespread as the government claims it to be, but it does take place. So when? Well, number one, a person enters the United States under someone else's name. They receive a visa or a passport, not the United States passport. Right now, I'm talking about they receive a passport of someone from a different country and they enter the United States using that passport. What's going to happen? Well, they committed immigration fraud, right? They misrepresented themselves. If the person enters the country this way, it still is accepted as being inspected and admitted for future adjustment of status purposes. It's very important to understand that. Why? Because they didn't claim to be a US citizen. They stated that they are a national or citizen of a different country. Yes, they misrepresented their name, but it's still considered to be inspected and admitted entry for adjustment of status purposes. And for this particular situation, there is a waiver available. Believe it or not, the United States government themselves saying that we can forgive you for this violation if you qualify for the waiver. We're going to talk about it later. But if a person enters the United States on a passport of what's look like to be a US citizen, they're not considered to be inspected and admitted for adjustment of status purposes. Plus, the person picks up additional ground of inadmissibility and removability claim of a US citizenship. So, never, never, ever do that. Claim of US citizenship is the worst allegation to have in your immigration record, along with a couple other ones that are pretty heavy, such as marriage fraud or frivolous asylum. Why? Because there are no waivers for those. The next very commonly occurring type of misrepresentation that often may happen to someone is when they fill out Form DS 160, application for non-immigrant visa to come to the United States. And they either misrepresent their marital status, claiming exactly that they're married when they're not, and it may occur even very often. The person says, well, it's someone else who did it for me. I paid an agency in my home country. They were the ones who filled out the form DS 160 for me. So I was not aware what's in the form. Guess what? You electronically signed that form, or they signed it for you as if you were aware of what's in the form, and you will be charged with that misrepresentation or fraud when you answered that you were married when you were not, in fact, married. So I see it a lot, unfortunately, with people who come to the United States and later they would like to file for adjustment of status based on marriage, true marriage to a US citizen. And people call me and say, listen, I have a problem. I went for my adjustment of status interview and the officer stated that I actually am married to someone already. And either I was not truthful or I did not know that that agency that helped me filling out paperwork for my visa listed me as a married person. What to do? In this situation, there is a waiver available, right? If you admit to committing that fraud or misrepresentation, there is a waiver available. So under the law, you may still get out of this situation. Next situation, when an allegation of fraud may occur, is when a person has a sham marriage. Sham marriage is when a person is not planning on building any relationship with the U.S. citizen. They don't have intimate relationship. They don't have any kind of relationship apart from this business transaction of the U.S. citizen helping non-citizen to become a green card holder. That's a sham marriage. And if a person is accused of that, there is no waiver available. It's very important to understand that. Now, when does sham marriage take place? What if I'm dating somebody and I really do like them, but now that somebody is placed in immigration removal proceedings? Well, now I'm thinking, let me marry them and help them to become a green card holder. Is there a marriage fraud here? No. Just because you have a dual intent, you want to marry the person, maybe you would have done it a little bit later, but you also would like to help a person to have the green card, that's not a sham marriage, right? It's very important to understand that. But let's say someone that you are not planning on marrying with, you're not planning on having a family with, approaches you and says, hey, listen, I'm in removal proceedings. Can you help me to get the green card? I'll pay you for that, or I'll give you some favor for that, or something like that. That's a sham marriage. All right. So that's the distinction between the sham marriage and not sham marriage. If such a marriage takes place, there are criminal penalties for that, for both non-citizen and citizen, fines, imprisonment up to 5 years, and of course, the heaviest consequences will be applied towards non-citizen. They will never be able to have a petition approved for them, either self-petition, employment petition, or petition by any other relative if they're accused of sham marriage. So bottom line, don't do that. I have tons of videos on my platform saying do not file for marriage-based green card if you don't have a real marriage because of this severe consequences and no waiver available. All right. Next, when we can encounter immigration fraud is within asylum cases. So not every misrepresentation within an asylum case will have this very, very heavy consequences I'm going to talk with you about. But if somebody misrepresents the core of the asylum case and the judge, immigration judge, makes frivolous asylum filing, guess what? There is no waiver for that. All right. So that's another very common, unfortunately, area where some people make this horrible mistake of misrepresenting, trying to strengthen their case for asylum. And if there is a finding of frivolous asylum filing, there will be no waiver for that. And of course, no other immigration benefit will be ever awarded to you, unfortunately. But what if you make a lesser misrepresentation with your asylum case, something that is not material, something that doesn't go into the core of your case? Believe it or not, sometimes judges will forgive you for that. And despite the fact that you have these minor misrepresentations, you may still have asylum granted. So that's very interesting area of law, actually, asylum. It really depends on the judge and the prosecutor, how everybody viewed your reasons for misrepresentation. And if they're explainable, they're logical, and do not go into the core of your asylum claim, it means that you still qualify for asylum. You still could prove that you will experience persecution in your home country, then the consequences of frivolous asylum will not be attached to your case. But that's, guys, the easiest way to avoid all this, just don't do it, all right? Don't do it. Don't try to strengthen your case, invent facts, present forged documents. As I say, it's better to have the truthful case than case where that makes you up at night. You cannot sleep at night, right? All right, now let's talk about the waiver. Let's say, unfortunately, it happened, right? You committed misrepresentation, you committed fraud, and the waiver is available. For some cases, the waiver will not be available. Claim of US citizenship, sham marriage, frivolous asylum, no waiver, but you committed just a regular fraud, all right? Frauded entry, or you misrepresented something else. Waiver is available. You stated, for example, that you were married, but you are not married, and now the government says, hey, we're going to give you a green card, but only if we approve that waiver. So the waiver is going to be filed on the form I-601, and you will have to show that your US citizen or permanent resident relatives, qualifying relative, is going to experience extreme hardship if the waiver is not approved. That's the qualifications for the waiver. And it's also discretionary. Even though you can show these points, the government will decide whether or not you deserve for the waiver to be granted. That's how it works. That's the waiver, and it's available. Sometimes it works, not sometimes, very often it works. If you do a good job, you truthfully are remorseful as to what happened, or you really didn't know what happened, yet there was this misrepresentation, and you will be able to still have your green card granted. All right. Very often it happens in connection with marriage-based green cards, not involving sham marriage, but misrepresentation about your status, married or not, or let's say sometimes employment even cases when the employment experience was misrepresented. So you may still have your ways out of this difficult situation. But of course, the better approach is not to be in this situation to begin with. All right. So that's what fraud is and what is not. And now you know that there is a waiver available, but not for some situations. Claim of your citizenship, sham marriage, and frivolous asylum, no waivers for that. By the way, if you are accused of sham marriage, there is still something that you can do, but it's not for everyone. There is a special waiver that can be filed for an immigration court only, that and only if you received your first green card based on that sham marriage. So that may be possible to file for, very difficult to have it granted. As you can imagine, judges are super against it. They do not like it when you ask for it, but you can, if you can present compelling circumstances and compelling equities in your favor, you may still have a chance, but only in immigration court and only if your first green card based on that sham marriage was granted. All right. And for US citizenship claim, you may sometimes successfully argue timely withdrawal, but it's very difficult again for this argument to work, but it may work. Timely withdrawal is when you, before the officer relied on your misrepresentation, withdrew your assertion that you are a US citizen. When can we see that? Very often at the border, when somebody's trying to get into the United States, and first they tell the officer, well, I'm a US citizen. You know, they freak out and they just say whatever. And the officer is like, let me check that. So before they find out that you're not a US citizen, if you say that, well, actually, I lied, I'm not a US citizen, then you may have a chance of getting away with that claim. Why do I say may have a chance? Well, because it's very, very fact specific. Sometimes I see cases coming out of courts where a person was found to have timely withdrawn their assertion of claim of this or that 2 years after they made the claim. And sometimes, if you trying to correct yourself 30 seconds after you stated something that was not true, the officials will say that it's not timely. Your withdrawal is not timely. So it's highly fact specific and really depends on adjudicator, the judge and officer who would be involved in the situation. But again, the best practice is just not to find yourself in this situation to begin with. Sometimes people lie to enter the United States to ask for asylum. They misrepresent themselves at the border. Very often, the government of the United States, if you later qualify for asylum, will forgive you for that. All right, so this is the situation with immigration fraud in a nutshell. So there is a legal way out. Sometimes it's better not to be in this situation to begin with, but if you are, you have to be truthful, trying to fix it. There is no benefits in furthering your misrepresentation or fraud for you, because the further you carry it out, the lesser the chances someone later will believe you that you are remorseful and will grant that waiver. Just keep that in mind. All right. And now, if you guys have questions, I know the topic is very difficult to discuss. I'm not asking you to admit anything online, God forbid. Remember that everything that we're discussing online is not confidential. If you have some questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. All right. Let's see. Hi, Jamal. Hi, Sajid. Thank you, guys. Hi, Hussein. I want to go to Europe on a work visa. That's great, but I can not help you with that at all because I only can help you with United States immigration. All right. Hi, Dinas. How USCIS checks again if you are LGBT when apply for a green card based on asylum? Well, I think they conduct their background checks. I'm not a party to those background checks or procedures. I do not work for the US government and never had. So, and I know that people who have worked, I don't think they would be disclosing that either. But I only can imagine that they will be checking using available databases. Let's see who else is registered to live with a person in the same dwelling, in the same apartment. That's easy to check. There is a clear database, and that's how it works. So it's going to tell you the names of the residents of the same apartment, for example. Social media, of course, gives us a lot of information. They're allowed to conduct inspections, site inspections, to come in and to see who's coming, who's entering the apartment with you, asking your neighbors and colleagues, things like that, I would say, right? So anything you can imagine, they're pretty much allowed to do, all right? Hi, Maria. What is the difference between marriage fraud and denial of the petition? Maria, in practice, there is very little difference if the petition is denied because of the lack of bona fide marriage evidence. Even though the marriage is real and you denied based on the lack of this bona fide evidence or proof of real marriage, you can refile the case or you can appeal. But usually refiling is better because you can collect more evidence and introduce this new evidence with the case, right, with a new case. But I have to tell you that in 99% of cases where a petition was prepared poorly and it was denied, later the government may do it years later, turns around and accuses the non-citizen of sham marriage. And it's unfair because sometimes the case is just poorly prepared. But what happens often is that people they get together, they do have real relationship, but they're like careless. They say, "Oh, I have a real relationship. Why do I need a lawyer? I'll just file whatever." My neighbor Natasha did the same herself without a lawyer, without spending thousands of dollars on a lawyer, and she was successful. So they file a case. It's not well prepared. By the time the interview happens, the couple has fights, they're fighting arguments, they cannot answer questions consistently. And there is a second interview invitation, and the couple just completely falls apart. They had a real marriage, but they couldn't, you know, they couldn't put themselves together to do what needed to be done. In 99% of such cases, the non citizen will be accused of sham marriage. Maybe it didn't take place, but that's what's going to happen. So, this marriage pathway to your green card is a very serious thing. Just because it's very commonly used, it's one of the most common ways for somebody to receive a green card. It doesn't mean it is the simplest way. I'm not saying that it's particularly difficult, but it's not simple in terms of this preparation. You have to be very thorough. You have to really meet your burden. You have to prepare for your interview and understand the risks. All right, if you just midway decide to abandon the process, there will be accusations of fraud. And what's really bad about that is that the initial denial may not mention fraud at all, because now there is I believe, if not mistaken, matter of one BIA decision that says, "Oh, for the government to later accuse you of fraud, they don't have to make this finding to begin with." In other words, example, in 2000, your marriage-based case was denied because you guys, with the first husband, couldn't prove that the marriage was bona fide, but then you started fighting with him and you said, "Forget it." You divorced him and abandoned the process. In the year 2015, you marry this wonderful person, you have 4 children together, you go for your green card. The officer finds the case from 2000 and says, wait a second, but it looks like that 2000 case was really weak. I think that was a sham marriage. You're stuck. Your second case will not be approved. All right? So just keep that in mind. Always prepare the cases very well, whether you do it with a lawyer, without a lawyer, and take the process very, very seriously. Okay? Very seriously. All right. So, guys from TikTok, I see you have tons of questions. Let me try answering them. All right. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for sharing the stream. Hi, Medmo. I want to apply for N400. I live in DC. Would you be able to help me apply? Yes, I would. Thank you for asking. You can call my office. What lecture is about? It was about immigration fraud. Very tough topic. I know many of you don't want to hear it. And but we need to know about that, right? Because especially it's true for people who are not committing fraud and they didn't have intention to commit any fraud, but because of their poor preparation, they may find themselves in this terrible situation and with terrible charges of fraud. Thank you guys for your gift. Thank you, Mr. Kamran. So let's see. How are you? I'm doing well. Thank you. Hi, Serge. How does I-751 interview continue or waived lately? Usually you will be called for the interview. This administration loves interviews, so most likely you will be called for the interview. I'm yet to see this administration waiving I-751 interviews. Okay. Hi, Dennis. Will it harm if you expedite ISLE green card? No, if you have a strong case and no issues, you can always request to expedite, right? Sky High Solutions. Are citizens be detained at airports? I have dismissed DV case. If you are a US citizen, you only will be detained at the US airport if you are subject to a warrant, usually, or you have some interesting issues like non-payment of child support. But typically, the CBP is not going to be detaining you. It's going to be different force. Okay. Hi, Serge. What if I have 2 kids? It doesn't matter, believe it or not. Even if you have 2 children with a person, you may still be called for the interview. I had a case where the person had 1 kid with the US citizen, and not only they were called for the interview, their first petition was denied. And I was like, how could they deny your case? Well, I didn't help them with the first petition, but I was surprised to learn that their first petition, even though the person is taking care of the kid, was denied. So sometimes the cases are very interesting. The decisions may be surprising. Okay. Hi, Peace. I got approved for my family asylum. What's the next step? I got approved for my family asylum. So if you are the main applicant and not all of your family members are in the United States, now is the time for you to file I-730 forms for them. All right, inviting them, your derivatives, to come to the United States. That I think would be the next step. Okay. Hi, Ella. После интервью по браку сколько ждать ответа? Обычно он приходит в течение 2 недель, может быть, максимум 6 месяцев, да. Если дольше занимает, это значит, что какая-то проблема, и вас будут вызывать на второе интервью. Ella asked, how long after the marriage-based interview, green card interview, to wait for the response? Usually within a couple of weeks, the most, you're going to get the decision. Like, for example, we had an interview for a person on the 7th, right? And 7th, was it? Or the 3rd, I'm sorry. So, and today we received the green card grant, not the green card itself, the notice that adjustment of status was approved. So typically it happens very quickly. At the same time, there was a quite difficult case where interview took place maybe 4 months ago, right? And we received a green card grant only a couple weeks ago. So each case is different, but if the case takes a very long time, usually it means that there are background checks and there will be second interview, okay? second interview. All right. Okay, thank you so much. But when I get the KBL number for the interview, well, if I understand you correctly, you mean for interview for your family members when they will be invited for the interview after I-730 is approved. Plus, I do not know how long the line will be and how long you will have to wait for that, because Department of State changed the rules as to where people have to go for the interviews. If that's your question, okay? I won't be able to give you a precise timeline, unfortunately. But what I've noticed with a lot of people who file this I-730s for their family members and who complain that for a very long time they don't receive invitation for the interview, I've noticed that many times these people did receive interview invitations, but they missed them because the paperwork went online to the inboxes. They either changed the emails or it went to their lawyers. Lawyers didn't check, or they just missed it. And then they're like, I'm waiting for a year, nothing is happening. But something was happening, you just missed it. So stay on top of the cases, it's very important. Typically, such cases move very, very fast. Within 6 months, you get an approval for your I-730. Within the next 6 months, you're called for the interview, right? Hi, Samantha. Does 5-year wait rule to sponsor wife also apply on VAWA-based green card cases? 5-year wait rule to sponsor your wife. Could you please let me know what it is you're talking about? Are you saying that if you received a green card based on marriage and you cannot sponsor somebody, what is it? What is this 5-year rule? Let me know, okay? I want to know what it is because I'm not familiar with that rule, I think. All right? But let me know. If a person receives a green card based on marriage, they can file for citizenship after 3 years, provided the condition on the green card is removed. And the same is true for VAWA cases. If you received a green card based on VAWA, then 3 years you have to wait. Okay? I'm not sure if that's the question. I do not know. You can give me some more information and maybe I'll be more helpful. Okay? All right, guys, let me know if you have more immigration questions. Let me see. Hi, peace, my wife and my son. Yes, I guess you're sponsoring your wife and your son. You're welcome, Ella. Can you check your case status online? Well, there will be very limited information that you can find out from online system. It's just going to say, for example, that the case was granted and USCIS ordered production of the card, things like that. Recently, you know what happened? I've noticed that when they say that they mailed you something, they no longer provide tracking number in those updates, within those updates. So you will not know what the tracking number is, unfortunately. Okay? So just watch out. Hi, Sammy. How long VAWA take now? VAWA cases take quite some time, about 2.5 years, I would say. Hi, Saman. I got my green card through VAWA in 2025. Can I sponsor my wife right after getting a green card? All right. How did you qualify for VAWA? Based on marriage or being an abused parent of a U.S. citizen? I don't know. So, you also need to know that if you got married before your I-360 was granted, most likely it was granted in error. It's going to be invalidated. So I'm not sure what's happening, right? With that abused spouse, yeah, talk to a lawyer before you're going to do anything because not sure when you guys got married, right? So you married somebody else, it means, right? You got married with someone else. So we're always very careful with cases like that because you need to know the timeline of second marriage, right? What happened with that, how it happened. Very important. All right. Hi, Aflatun. I got my citizenship through asylum. Now, can I go back to my home country? Why would you want to do that? Yes, you can, but you have to use US citizenship passport, US passport to do so, right? Remember, once you asked for asylum, you technically became, an asylum was granted, you became a person without citizenship for a while, and then you received citizenship of the United States. So now, wherever you go, you have to use that citizenship, not your old passport and not credentials from your old country. Remember that. Oh, I understand that sometimes there will be some difficult situations, but every time you use that passport, you have to explain the compelling circumstances. All right, if you are questioned about that. So it's better to avoid this to begin with, right? What is the situation nowadays in courts in New York? What is the situation in immigration courts? Well, we are waiting for the arrival of military judges who supposedly are going to be very quickly deciding cases. A lot of our good judges were fired, so judges with a high percentage of approvals. And, you know, now there will be military judges here, and I don't think they will be friendly, and I don't think they will be on top of the United States immigration law. So we're gonna see how it's all going to happen. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen with that. But not thankfully, not all good judges were fired, but many of them were. I found that judges who were dismissed were judges with the private practice background and non for profit background, even if they worked for a while for immigration courts. But those who worked for the government before, those stayed. And sometimes they're okay, they're not like too bad. All right. So that's what it is. All right, guys. So if you have some more questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to wish you all a happy weekend and stay away. I hope you're going to stay away from immigration trouble. But if you do have some immigration issues that you need to resolve, you are welcome to call our office 917-885-2261. And of course, I hope everybody's going to stay safe and healthy. And I hope to see you guys soon.